Before we put the slides up, I've got a bit of a quiz question. And I don't want anybody looking this up. You've got to know it. You've only got 1 second to put your hand up and for me to pick you. And you've got to know the answer to both questions, not just answer one of them. So here goes the question. And if young people here would be good, they could very much get involved. Who was the pagan king who cast Daniel into the lion's den, and what was the name of his empire? Okay, up the back.
Darius of the Persian Empire.
Which? Anybody else? Unfortunately, she got it right straight away. Who was going to say Nebuchadnezzar? Be honest. Nobody. I tricked Helen this morning. Helen, of all people, tricking her. Yes, that was Darius. Darius, not Nebuchadnezzar, and his kingdom was the Persian kingdom. So, okay, she got it right. All right, let's have the slides, if we can. Thanks, Lee. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Persian Empire, but we're going to particularly just pick on one king, not Darius. We might mention Darius a little bit later on. By the way, there were 3 Dariuses, or Darius, however you like to say it, 1, 2 and 3. And Darius the first was but not known as Darius the first for some reason. He was actually just Darius. And then there was first and second. And the second one was the last Persian king. But the other one, of course, of great importance is this guy called Cyrus. And we've had a lot of people down through history that have been the Great, Alexander the Great, and so on. Some queen in Russia, Catherine the Great, and a few like that. So Cyrus the Great, a pagan Persian king. And crazy thing is that he was mentioned in the Bible. He did great things in the name of God, but he lived and died a pagan king, as did Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, who saw great things and did great things in the name of the Lord, you don't really read that he ever repented completely and became a believer and still worshipped their pagan gods. Anyhow, that's another story. Okay, next slide. Okay. Might put these on. So we have this amazing mention of Cyrus about 712 BC. So it was God, I've put in brackets, that confirmed the word of his servant and performed the counsel of his messengers, that saith to Jerusalem, thou shalt be inhabited, and to the cities of Judah ye shall be built, and I'll raise up the decayed places thereof. That prophecy, of course, was incredibly important because it involved eventually the birth of Jesus. The people that went back to Jerusalem, rebuilt Jerusalem, re-inhabited the whole land of Palestine, and then, from this prophecy, 700 years later, Christ was born. That saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers. And of course, that's a prophecy of the way that Cyrus broke into the city of Babylon, where they blocked off the Euphrates River, just enough to go under the door, or whatever you call it, up into the city, and destroyed. There was the end of the last Babylonian king, and Belshazzar. Verse 28, and thus saith of Cyrus, so here's God's actually named him, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, this is what Cyrus said, or God said through Cyrus, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. It's interesting because it was while he was alive that the foundation was laid, but it wasn't until quite a bit later that they eventually built the temple. Now we go straight on to chapter 45 and verse 1. Next slide. So let's roll straight on. Thus saith the Lord God to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates. And there it is again. And the gate shall not be shut. I will go before thee. As we know, if you read, I think it's Daniel chapter 5, you read there how that there was a great party and they worshipped the gods of gold and silver and mocked the God of Israel and so on, which is never a good practice. And while they were doing that, it was actually Darius who was the one that led the army that night. He broke in and took the city. In verse 2, and I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness. They did it at night time. And hidden treasures of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel. Next slide. For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel mine elect, I have even called thee by thy name. There he really makes a point of that. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. And that, in a sense, is sad, because maybe eventually he didn't worship the God of Israel. You wonder how in the world he didn't. I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me. So it's a very good point, Cyrus, basically. Are you listening to what I'm saying? There is no God beside me. I girded thee, that thou hast not, though thou hast not known me, that thou may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is none else. I form the light, I create the darkness, I make peace, and I create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So we just see there that when Cyrus was born, maybe 150 years before, maybe a bit later, 170 years later, he came in and the Persians took over the Babylonian Empire. Next slide. So that was the Persian Empire which it grew to. As you can see there, it goes right through to the border of India, Afghanistan on the eastern end. Persepolis became a capital more than Babylon, even though Babylon was still a great city. They went right through and took the end of the Mediterranean Sea, which is where Palestine is, and then down all the top of Egypt, right along the north coast there, and even right through to Greece and Macedonia and all that region there. Next slide. So Chronicles, prophesying 170 years later. Now in the first year, or not prophesying, declaring what happened. In the first year of the year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth hath the Lord God of heaven given me. Of course, what he knew, he didn't know about Latin America, for example. And he that hath charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? The Lord his God be with him, and let him go up. That's actually the end of the book of Chronicles, 2 Chronicles. And then we go to next slide. So that one, of course, as we know, was a bit hard to see that here. That was when Belshazzar was parting, and the hand of the Lord came and wrote on the wall, tickle, tickle, tickle the parson, I think it said, or something like that. And tickle you fast, and I should have said, you weighed in the balances, you're found wanting, your kingdom is divided, and you've lost it. And that night, within a few minutes of seeing that on the wall, he was dead, and the kingdom was taken over. They came in under the wall, as the Bible prophesied, way back in the book of Isaiah, 150 years at least, or 170 I think it was, before that night. Next slide. So Ezra starts off with pretty well exactly the same as the book of Chronicles finishes, but we'll read it again. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? And his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. Next slide. And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place, in other words, people living around Jerusalem, his place, help him with silver and with gold and with goods and with beasts, besides the freewill offering for the house of God that is Jerusalem. Then we jump down to verse 7. Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. And as you know, that they were worshipping them the night of their downfall. Even those did Cyrus, king of Persia, bring forth by the hand of Mithredath, how do you say his name, the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. Next slide. A little bit more here. So these are the great prophecies and the fulfilment of that. And I dare say for us, the thought is that Cyrus has gone down in secular history as being very famous, maybe the author of what we call the Charter of Equal Rights for People and so on. But for us, when we read in our Bible how that was fulfilled, which is quite exciting, that again God prophesied and it got fulfilled. And verse 9 of the same chapter it says, And this is the number of them, 30 charges of gold and 30,000 charges of silver, 29 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of second sort 410, and other vessels 1,000. All the vessels of gold and silver were 5,400, and all these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them out of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. So I dare say the thought is that when they had eventually rebuilt the temple, all this which had come out of the original Solomon's temple went back into the temple. And also we know that the king, he supported it and gave them building materials, we'll say, to build the temple. Next slide. One thing I'll say before I go any further, and that is that none of the Persian kings knowingly persecuted the children of Israel. We know that Darius cast Daniel into the lion's den, but he got tricked into doing it. He didn't want to do it. And it's interesting with at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, when the young princes were thrown into the fiery furnace, that the people that threw him in, or them, those in that case, them in, and the people who actually did the act, they all died. Either died with the flame, he heated it up 7 times. And when we come to the story of Daniel being thrown into the lion, the same thing happened. The people that, dobbed him in and so on, the lion still got their meal. But Daniel was saved. So we have this little, you can see how small it is, only about this big. See that? I remember when we saw it in the London Museum, in the British Museum, I get that right. By the way, there is a London Museum as well, but the British Museum, I heard about the Cyrus cylinder. I thought it must be big, but it's only little. There's a bit of a chunk of it missing. But this particular little cylinder is very famous, and it's got writing on it that is about the equality of man. So this particular princess presented the United Nations Secretary General Youthant with a replica of the cylinder. The princess asserted that the heritage of Cyrus was the heritage of human understanding, tolerance, courage, compassion, and above all, human liberty. Her brother, the Shah, promoted the cylinder as a charter of human rights. So as you can see, it's being picked up there with gloves so that it's not in any way damaged. Next slide. Now, when you go to the British Museum, if you've never been there, there it is in a glass case. Bit hard to pick out, but on the right, and just see the light on it. And as I said, when I first went to the British, I knew about it. I thought, oh, it's only little, sort of picturing something spectacular. But anyhow, they have deciphered the ancient Persian, and I got a little bit of what it says in a minute. Although the cylinder clearly was post-date Cyrus the Great's conquest of Babylon in 539 BC, the date of its creation is unclear. It is commonly said to date to the early part of Cyrus' reign over Babylon, sometime after 539 BC. By the way, the Babylonian Empire only lasted 70 years. In 609 BC, the father of Nebuchadnezzar, Philip, sorry, I got the wrong guy. Am I right, Philip? It was Nabopolassar. Oh, Philip was, of course, Alexander the Great's father. Got two kingdoms muddled up. So go back to Nabopolassar. What a name. Anyhow, by the way, if there's any mothers-to-be that know you're having a little son, there's a good Bible name, Nabopolassar. Where I lost myself there. He defeated the last stand by the Assyrians. So that was 609 BC. Nebuchadnezzar came to the throne 5 years later in 604. So the date of 70 years later, 539 BC. The date of its creation is unclear. It is commonly to date the early part of Cyrus's reign over Babylon, sometime around that time. The British Museum puts the cylinder's date of origin at the beginning, or between 539 and 530. Next slide. So there is a little bit of what's written on there. I grabbed a bit. So when you think of all what Cyrus did and how God spoke to him, and we don't know exactly how that happened, it's hard to imagine that he was interested in any other god. But the reading on this cylinder is a mass of pagan gods, particularly the god Marduk. And when I've got the ... right at the end there, that was again where he came in and said that this was all to the glory of Marduk. So anyway, I thought I'd leave that out and just grab the bit where people believe, and there's a lot more talking about the equal rights of people, or the Bill of Rights. My vast troops marched in. By the way, these guys boasted big time. All these kings did. You could see it with Nebuchadnezzar. What a great and glorious king he was. Nobody could out say how wonderful, more than what they could, how great they were. And I'm afraid Cyrus the Great was no different. So here he goes, a little bit on that cylinder. My vast troops marched in Babylon peacefully. I did not let any harm or pain distress the land of Babylon and people. I tried to improve Babylon conditions. Nabonidus had put a yoke on suffered Babylonians that they did not deserve. I removed the yoke and removed all their misery. I let them worship their gods freely and ordered no one kills or harms the population of Babylon, and so it goes on. So you can see that's sort of the way it's worded on a peaceful sort of situation. Next slide. So later on, because of its fame and what it represents, a replica of it, and that earlier on when you saw the guy holding it, is a replica given to the United Nations. Now we know the United Nations is in New York, a big rectangular building in New York, but it is, even though it's on a bit of American soil, the whole idea of the United Nations and the building and the spot is that it belongs to the world. So all the nations of the world have, or most of them have, a representative in the United Nations. So even though this is, as you might say, in America, it's in the foyer of the United Nations, and it's got a replica of this little cylinder. Next slide. So, quite famous that Eleanor Roosevelt, after her husband, Franklin, was deceased at the end of the Second World War, or towards the end of the Second World War, after that time, she decided, because of the writings of Cyrus, came up with, and I'm sure she didn't prepare it all herself, so she's actually presenting it not to Congress, not to the Senate, which is both American, but to the United Nations. So it's not just to do with America, it's to do with everybody. Eleanor Roosevelt presented the Universal Declaration of Human Rights based on the Cyrus Cylinder to the United Nations. Next slide. And I dare say the thought is everyone has the right. Eleanor Roosevelt, the Universal, said that a bit of a drawing of the same thing. Next slide. Now, amazingly enough, in the Olympic Park in Sydney, for the year 2000, when we had the Olympic Games, if you walk through the park outside the stadium, there is a statue of Cyrus the Great in Australia, in Sydney. You think, why would that be there? I dare say because the Olympic Games, almost other than the United Nations, represents all the nations of the world. It's where people come equally together. And the old saying, may the best man or the best woman, or we don't know what else to say these days, do we? May they win. And it doesn't matter what country they're from. I should have found out how many nations the Olympic Games. Anybody got any idea? Wow, a lot of nations. 200 and something? Yeah, nations go to the Olympic Games. And it has got political a couple of times, where at one time America banned the Russians, another time the Russians banned the Americans. Of course, we had the horrible time when some of the Israeli athletes were murdered by the Palestinians or from the Middle East somewhere. But generally the Olympic Games is non-political. I only ever missed one, and that was in the middle of the Second World War. So 1936, like it or not, maybe there were two, would have been two. It was the German one with Adolf Hitler and everybody Sieg Heiling, and Adolf Hitler being very upset that some of the African Americans were better athletes than the pure Aryan blood, as he said, and particularly Jesse Owens, the runner who won 4 gold medals, and he was an amazing athlete, and Adolf Hitler was not very happy about that. But anyhow, other than that, and obviously 1940 must have missed, maybe 1944 must have been missed, and 1944, I think 48 was in Helsinki. I think that was the first one, or 52, one of those. Anyhow, there it is. I grabbed just the mention of Cyrus in the book of Daniel, even though Daniel mainly refers to Darius. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, and the thing was true, but the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. Next slide. So, interesting point of note that he didn't come in on that night, the night that the Babylonian Empire ended, and that was really Darius who came in. He was sort of immediate. But the early part of the kingdom was called the Medo-Persian Empire. But as time passed, the Medes, that got forgotten. So down through history, it ended up mainly being just referred to as the Persian Empire. It's interesting, one of the images that represented that was the bear, and he was on one side like this, which meant the imbalance, that the Medes were going to go and the Persians were going to take over completely. So it was not until 17 days later, after the taking of the city of Babylon, that the man Cyrus actually walked into great welcome by the people. And as I said, all the Persian kings, all of them, were good to the children of Israel. You think of Ahasuerus, the Esther's husband, and at that particular... Again, he got tricked, or nearly got tricked, by Haman to destroy the Jews, but he personally had no grudge. He actually married a Jewish girl, Esther, and so you can go through all the kings, though none of them were bad to the children of Israel. So number 17, we just thought it's interesting he walked in 17 days after it was taken. It represents safety and security. King Darius the Mede which is mentioned in Daniel 9 verse 1 and Daniel 11 verse 1, became the governor on the fall of Babylon. 17 days later, Cyrus the Great, Cyrus the Persian, arrived in the city of Babylon. Next slide. So, they say and call this the tomb of Cyrus the Great, still there today. There's no reason to believe it's not. There's no great reason to believe it is. But it is out in the plain area of in the area of the original Persian Empire. And he's certainly not in there. There's no bones or body in there or no remains. But they believe that for a while, when he died, he rested in there. A man mentioned by God, a man who did what God wanted him to do, but he was but a pagan. Next slide. And that's it, folks. It's time to have some prayer, isn't it? All right? All right, let's have some prayer, and I'll hand back to Pastor Chaz.